Bullets cracked through the air like whips as the ridge shook under mortar fire. And Staff Sergeant Jada Knox lay flat in a mud pit that used to be a sniper nest, her face streaked with sweat, dirt, and blood, her eyes locked on a broken radio that hadn't worked in 4 hours, because the forward base had been hit first, their comms fried, their drones down, and their commanding officer, some fresh out of school butterbar, had already panicked and declared the mission a loss. Even though 480 Marines were still pinned down in that valley, surrounded on all sides, their medevac birds turned away, their air support called off, their hope ripped out by silence and smoke. But Jada, crouched above them all with a rifle she'd cleaned 100 times, didn't wait for permission, because she'd seen this before, in Fallujah, in Sanjin, in dusty hills where backup never came and men bled to death behind sandbags because someone said hold, someone said wait, someone said follow protocol. And she remembered the time her little brother, private first class with a crooked smile, bled out in her arms while command argued about airspace clearance. So now she didn't care about protocol, not when she could see her team being chewed apart by enemy fire, screaming over open lines for help, for cover, for anything. And when she saw one Marine, a kid, maybe 19, get torn in half trying to drag a wounded sergeant behind a burnt-out Humvee, something in her snapped, a wire cut loose deep in her soul, and without thinking, she rolled out of cover, slid down the ridge, and whispered, "Not this time," then moved fast between rocks and bodies, her sniper rifle slung behind her, her sidearm tight in hand, and when she found 3 more survivors trying to regroup behind a flipped-over APC, she joined them without a word, took one look at the hill they'd come from, and said, "We take it back," because that ridge was the only high ground, and if they didn't control it, there were fish in a barrel, and even as one corporal stammered, "We were told to retreat, extraction's been scrubbed," Jada cut him off with a glare so sharp it could slice steel, backed, "There's no extraction. Not until we make one," and started calling out coordinates, pointing out weak spots in the line, barking orders like a general, moving like she was made of fire and instinct, while others followed because they had no one else to follow, and every minute counted, because bodies were piling up and ammo was running low, and as Jada crawled up that broken hill under sniper fire, she felt a round tear through her sleeve, felt heat slice her arm, but she kept moving, kept flanking nests with precision shots, kept tossing smokes and dragging wounded, even when her radio crackled once with high command screaming, "Who authorized this assault?" And she just spat into the dirt and said, "I did," then cut the line and pressed forward. And soon word spread like lightning. Jada's here. Jada's moving. Jada's not backing down. And scattered squads started to rise, started to regroup, to fight, because someone believed they could win. And when she got to the top of the ridge and took out the 3-man mortar team with 3 shots and 1 thrown knife, she stood tall for a second, chest heaving, the sun behind her, and it felt like the whole valley held its breath. And then the tide turned, because now they had eyes, now they had cover, now they had her, and the enemy began to fall back, inch by inch, as Jada guided her team like a hawk, pulling Marines from wreckage, clearing buildings one by one, finding wounded under rubble and carrying them on her back through open ground while bullets danced at her heels. And not once did she stop, not when her arm went numb from recoil, not when her legs shook from blood loss, not when she slipped in someone else's guts and kept moving like it was water, because her mission was simple. Don't let them die like her brother did, alone, waiting for help that never came. And when night fell and the valley went quiet, she had led a final charge on the enemy's last bunker, cleared it with a squad of 6, and when the dust settled, 480 Marines were still alive, bruised, bloody, burned, but alive, and no one understood how until they saw her limping back into the main camp with a wounded private on her shoulder, face caked in soot, gear torn, eyes blazing, and behind her, a line of survivors like ghosts come home, and someone whispered, "She brought them back," and it spread like wildfire, not just through the unit but through the base, through command, through the entire region, the legend of the sniper who broke every rule to save her people, and when the medics tried to patch her up, she waved them off, said, "Others need it more." And when the general flew in 2 days later, medals in hand, pressed behind him, he asked, "Who took command?" And the answer came from every Marine who'd survived. She did, and they pointed to Jada, sitting on a crate, cleaning her rifle, not caring about ceremony or headlines, just checking her scope for scratches. And the general approached her, offered the medal, but she shook her head and said, "I didn't do it for this." And he asked, "Then why?" And she looked past him to the med tent where boys she'd carried were now laughing, drinking juice, alive, and she said, "Because no one else would," and walked away before the cameras could flash. And that clip of her turning her back on the press, limping away alone, was played around the world, and kids started writing her letters, and mothers cried when they saw her face, and even the brass who once threatened her with court-martial now stood silent when her name came up. And months later, in a quiet hallway at HQ, the same general who once demanded who authorized this signed off on a new protocol named Jada Knox, which allowed field leadership under extreme isolation. And when asked why he named it after her, he said, "Because she proves sometimes one good Marine is enough." And by then Jada was back in the field. No fancy title, no promotion, just her gear, her boots, and a tattoo on her shoulder that read 474, the number she brought home. And when a young private once asked her, "Why'd you go back in alone?" she looked him in the eye and said, "Because I remember what it feels like when nobody comes." And the private nodded and never forgot her face. And years later, when war broke out again in another dusty nowhere, a fresh commander froze on the comms, and someone whispered, "Call Knox." And the old sergeant, now gray at the temples but sharp as ever, rolled up her sleeves, grabbed her rifle, and said, "Let's go get our boys." And the cycle repeated, because some heroes don't just wear medals. They leave a trail of people who live to tell the tale.